The objective for today is to actionize your penetration test results, figuring out what to do after you've had a penetration test and what you're supposed to do with what you're given. So the topics that we're going to be facing today, first off, know how to analyze the pen test results. What do those results even mean? How do the results affect you and your business? And how you can go deeper with those results. We'll also talk about prioritizing and remediating issues from the penetration test, picking out what issues are important, figuring out what you need to fix ASAP, what can wait, and then dealing with the possibility of issues that can't be fixed. We'll also discuss briefly preparing for a retest. This fits in really well with prioritization and remediation. We'll talk about gearing up for a reassessment, and we'll also let you know what a reassessment is, and whether or not you may need another penetration test, and how to know when your network is quote unquote secure. And then we'll go even further from there and just taking the next step and talking about maintaining your security over time. So the first important step is figuring out who needs to know. Who needs to know about the penetration test results, who needs to know the information contained within a penetration test. Not everyone needs the pen test results, but they can be very useful for anyone who sees them. That includes people who are involved in the process, not involved in the process, and malicious attackers. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So like I said, not everyone needs the pen test results, but they are critical for people involved in the remediation process. So this is going to be anyone who's going to make changes to a network, anyone who has control over whether or not these changes happen. This includes technical and non-technical team members and may involve outside sources. So maybe if you have an outside IT provider or an outside developer that manages your websites, things like that. And then, of course, management also needs to know the risks that a company is facing. So everyone that is involved in the remediation circle should be privy, at least partially, to the penetration testing results. And if you don't have all those pieces in line, you may not be able to make the changes that you need to make. So making sure that everyone that needs to know is in the know is a good step. But it's also really important that people who don't need to know don't know. You know, we love Deborah in accounting, but Deborah doesn't need the entire pen test report to know what she can do to help secure the network. So ensuring that the results are kept close to the chest, close to anyone who's part of that remediation process, ensuring that that data isn't exposed to potential attackers or even staff members who just may end up making a mistake. That being said, the results can be very educational. And that's why attackers love them. So if you are interested in sharing those results with your staff, there are ways that you can discuss the results with them, discuss possible solutions to issues. Now, the thing about pen tests is that it kind of sounds like a sci-fi concept for people who haven't had experience with a penetration test. The idea of hiring someone to do essentially what an attacker would do almost sounds a little too fun. But a pen test isn't just a hacker playing around on your network. It's not just someone like me bouncing from machine to machine trying to get in. Pen testers are highly trained specialists. We're here to give you a perspective on your network that you may not be getting from your internal staff. If you have technical people on the inside, a pen test can help guide them. If they're not a security specialist, or even if they are, a pen test provides a great perspective that can give them the data that they need to make the changes to the network that are going to take you to the next step in security. If you don't have technical people, a pen test can be the doorway to understanding cyber risk or information security risk. If you don't have that perspective, especially if you don't have technical people on the inside, a pen test can be critical, and sometimes a pen test ends up being a company's very first look into what risks they're facing. And pen tests also help you face the concerns you already have. A lot of people that come to us for penetration testing are going for compliance. Compliance looks good. It makes your company fit in the industry that it's in. It displays a level of prowess and effort, but it's also oftentimes an industry demand. Sometimes a company can't function without compliance. And then it's also the security for your clientele and any other companies that you work with. So ensuring that that data is secure, ensuring that everything functions as you intend it to function is really important. And that compliance can tie into other things, and it may just be your job to ensure the security of the network. So even if you're not going for a big certificate or an audit, it may still be up to you to make sure that your network is secure. So a penetration test can help you see what you're dealing with. Obviously, if it's your job to secure the network, it's not going to be a good day if something happens. So a penetration tester can really be your best friend there and help you prep your network and get it to where it needs to be. And the modern security climate is not slowing down. There isn't a day where something new isn't popping up, where a new attack isn't being developed, and when new malware isn't being spat out. So knowing what attackers are doing, what they can see, what they're up to, is a really good way to keep up. So you have the results from a penetration test, but what now? And I guess that kind of encompasses the entire concept we're trying to hit here. So here's some questions that you may have about your penetration test results. First off, how are you supposed to read them? What's a vulnerability? Where is it? What threat does it pose to you or your company? What are some issues that could arise from addressing these vulnerabilities? Are some issues more critical than others? And how can you tell what's important to focus on? These are all things that I'm hoping I'll be able to answer for you guys today. And these are also things that a penetration test report should answer. If there is an issue where you receive a penetration test report from a pen tester and you can't answer these questions, you might have a bit of an issue. How do you use the results? And this is the next level of that, what the results are for and what they mean. So how can those results be useful once you understand them? How do you remediate issues, address vulnerabilities, and how do you choose what to prioritize over time? And what if you can't solve a problem found during testing? And this is something that actually happens more than you may think. And it's something that there are mitigating factors that you can take. And what then? So you've gotten your pen test report, you've already done your remediation. How do you keep a secure environment after the pen test is complete? All that work, and what do you do? And then there's always the age-old question of, do you need another pen test? Luckily, here at Pivot Point, we understand. Pen testing results can be kind of difficult to manage, but don't worry, we've done this thing once or twice, or rather about 1,800 times since 2007. And we know what you need to know. Readability is critical for being able to proceed into remediation efforts. It's critical that results allow a client to be able to address risks and vulnerabilities. And we understand that, and we strive for that. So I'm hoping that we can help provide you what you need to know here today. All right, so when you're analyzing the pen test results, before you start digging into the documents, there's a couple of things that you should be receiving from every pen test. Now, every penetration test is going to be different. Every company has a different methodology. Every pen tester has a different tool set. Every report is structured a little different. That being said, there are things that are considered a standard best practice, and these are the attributes of those best practices. So first and foremost, and this is something that I very personally believe is critical, is communication. This happens before, during, and after a penetration test. Essentially, you should never be left hanging while a penetration tester is working with you. You should be able to ask them questions. You should be able to give them information and data about your network. It should be a tandem effort throughout the entire project. This allows you to not only learn how the process works, but it also gives you the resources that you need to face those risks. If you can't even communicate with your tester, you can't ask questions, you can't verify data, and you essentially can hardly move forward. But besides that, formal documentation is, of course, the crown jewel of a pen test. You definitely want your results documented, and the detailed results of testing should include things like what vulnerabilities were discovered, what possible attack vectors were found, explanation of possible risks. Usually, they also include a standard scoring for issues, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. And evidence, and this is where the penetration testing evidence comes in. So if your report does not have evidence, how do you know they did what they said? How do you know that the tester performed a test on your network? A picture's worth 1,000 words. If you have screenshots and explanations of issues, explanations of exploitation, then you have a real good meaty background of what was done. So having all that bundled up into a formal report, or in some cases multiple reports, can be really critical to your efforts post-penetration test. So a good penetration test report has all of the above. A bad pen test report leaves you confused. You may not know what your network is facing. You're kind of helpless to solve problems. And it's just frankly ugly when a penetration tester doesn't include some of the essentials. To show you how a report should look, I've gathered a few pieces from some of our reports. Pivot Point uses a best practice and industry standard in our reporting to make sure that you have all the information that you need, not just to understand the testing, but to explain it to others on your team, things of that nature. So we're going to go through a couple of those here just to help you understand the deliverables that you may be faced with. So this is an example of a methodology. This explains how testing was run from start to finish, from the scope definition, reconnaissance, vulnerability detection, exploitation, and reporting and support. This is Pivot Point's methodology. That being said, it's similar to other methodologies because we do use an industry standard. Having that methodology in the report can help make the difference for you when you're trying to explain the results to someone else. If you are a technical member of staff trying to explain it to someone who is non-technical, it can be very useful. And if you are non-technical, obviously it's for you. And this is also something that should be explained by the penetration tester during the process, but having it in the documentation allows you to maintain record of that testing. This is the CVSS v2 framework. So just a little bit of background on what this is. Essentially, there are multiple standards in the industry today that framework vulnerability ratings. And what that means is vulnerabilities are issues that may be present on your network. For example, maybe you have a SSL certificate that is invalid. And then this framework, the CVSS or other frameworks, take that vulnerability and they quantify it. So they give it a numbered score. In CVS's case, you actually get 3 different scores, but all different frameworks use different structure. Some use lettering systems, some use just plain numbering systems. CVSS actually also converts to a critical high, medium, low vulnerability rating. But having this standard helps you prioritize the issues on your pen test. And if you don't have a standard for reference, you won't really know where to start. I have seen a couple of people try to create their own standards, and it can get really jumbled and confused if it's not following an industry standard. So making sure that you have that reference point is very important to allowing you to prioritize those vulnerabilities. And then this right here, it doesn't look like much, but this is actually a benchmark. This is also based on the CVSS version 2. What a benchmark is it serves as a comparison point for your industry. So this allows you to see what numbers other companies may be getting on their penetration tests. So these scores are derived from the vulnerability counts, and then the higher score is more at risk, the lower score is less at risk. In this case, this is more to provide you with a perspective of what you're dealing with in your industry. This is not necessarily required on a penetration test. It's just nice to have, and it's something that we like to provide so that you can have that point of comparison. And it gives you a benchmark, essentially, of where other companies may be, what the expectation may be for your company, things of that nature. So like I said, this is based off the CVSS scoring for the vulnerabilities. And this is another perspective of that CVSS scoring. We find it very important to quantify your vulnerabilities. So every penetration test should include a list of the vulnerabilities discovered. However, just having a big list of a bunch of vulnerabilities, especially in a case like this, when you have 474 critical vulnerabilities, a big list of them doesn't really quantify what you're dealing with. So instead, we display it in a pie chart that shows it on the entire network. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways that this data can be displayed, and there's a lot of different ways that it can be read. But having a higher level perspective of your network can really help you figure out what you need to prioritize. So this data can, once again, it comes in many forms. It can come in multiple tables and graphs. It can be sorted by IPs or by subnets. Essentially anything that allows you to better address your vulnerabilities is a bit easier than just listing them all out. And now we're getting into the fun stuff. So something that should be included on penetration testing is, like I mentioned, the exploitation evidence. In this case, it's the tool output. So this is actually output from a tool called Metasploit Professional. It's one of many tools that we utilize. And it's part of the pen test action evidence. So it lets you know how the pen tester is assessing your network. These will always vary, even between different testers of the same company. Hackers love their toolkits, and every single one is different. For example, I have a friend and we've been hacking together for almost 10 years, and he writes all his exploits from scratch in a language called Ruby so that he can put them into Metasploit. I like Python better, so I do everything manually. So every screenshot is going to be different based on the methodology of the person performing the test. However, the results that they produce are often similar or the same, and that's a good way to verify results. But it gives you a perspective on the attacker's mindset, what they look for, how they do it, and how their data appears laid out. It may not always make perfect sense to you, and it is the attacker's responsibility to describe what is being shown in a way that you can understand. And it also proves something was done. Like, okay, the network's been assessed. And then going further into that exploitation evidence, here we have an actual chunk of evidence data from an exploitation. So exploitation evidence can be screenshots or explanations of exploitation efforts. This is how attackers prove vulnerabilities are present. It's also further proof of testing. It doesn't always result in a hacker, saying I'm in. It doesn't always, pop a shell to your attacker's machine. Sometimes an attacker may not be able to exploit a vulnerability, but they can confirm it. So this example here is actually of the Windshock vulnerability, which when exploited will cause a denial of service condition, which is considered out of scope for the kind of testing that we sometimes do. So we actually have a script that we use to verify the presence of that vulnerability. So we can confirm to you that that vulnerability is there without actually exploiting it. Having this data is good because once again, you can see the hacker mindset at work. You can also see the actual tool output confirming the vulnerability on your host. So if you have someone you need to convince that you need to fix the machine, there you go. And it's, like I said before, having a picture is worth 1,000 words. Knowing how that test is run can make a heck of a difference. So once you've gone through your pen testing results, it's hard to figure out where to start when you have to prioritize and remediate. And by remediate, we just mean fixing the issues, addressing the vulnerabilities, solving the problems. The report, of course, should not leave you floating in space. Standard reporting includes remediation options and suggestions, things that are documented all over the place about how to address certain vulnerabilities. That should be included in your reporting. And vulnerabilities should also be organized, probably by a framework like the CVSS, so you know what's important, so that you know where you can start addressing issues. That being said, things that are flagged as critical and high are called that for a reason. These are going to be your big focus points. Stress the big things before the numerous small things, because the unfortunate fact about all security is that it's a journey and that there will always be a bunch of little issues and it may seem overwhelming. No worry to be alarmed there. It's normal. It's just important to start moving in on the big fish and then kind of work your way down. The only time that this is not necessarily the case is if there's something that you can fix right away. Even if it's a small issue, if it's something where you can flick a switch and suddenly it's solved, then it's probably a good idea to flick that switch if you're able. But like I said, no network is perfect. External networks will always be at risk from the outside. Dang that internet connection. And then internal networks will always be at risk from things like malicious insiders, malware, and the good old user error, which usually goes hand in hand with that malware. But strive for the best that you can achieve. Like, security is a process, and you'll get there as you take the steps. And you will come across situations once in a great while where you won't be able to fix an issue. This is a real scenario, and it sounds kind of weird, but it actually makes sense in play. Updates will sometimes interact poorly with programs. For example, Windows updates are notorious for interacting poorly with other software. If you're writing that lifetime license of Photoshop from 2001, Windows 10 updates are going to kill that. So things may no longer work properly or even boot. That being said, do you really need Photoshop 2001? It might be time to update. Updates sometimes interact poorly with hardware. And I hate to pick on Windows. I'm a Linux girl, but I love Windows, so it's okay. I can be critical. But the Windows patch for the notorious Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities from last year, which is an actual inherent issue with the actual structure of Intel processors in computers, the patch itself to fix the issue cut performance by 30%. And that can be a killer for certain machines that need to be performing certain tasks. So it can be kind of a gamble when you're dealing with patches on whether or not you can update in that case. That being said, similar issues popped up with Linux patches, but we're going to pretend I didn't mention that. And sometimes hardware is the problem. If you've got a printer from the 80s that has served you well, but it hasn't been supported for over a decade, it's time to swap it out. Once things reach end of life and are no longer receiving updates and patches, the hardware becomes obsolete. And the only way to address those issues is to fix them by eliminating those machines entirely. That being said, you can take a couple of paths when you're dealing with these risks. First off, if you absolutely cannot remove a machine or apply a patch, and this is after you've already analyzed if the issues on these hosts are worth keeping, because at the end of the day, even if you do mitigate, you're still going to have that machine on your network. And also, you need to analyze if you really need it. Do you really need, that 15-year-old video camera that can't get updates? Do you really need that coffee maker that doesn't get patched? But the best way that you can kind of cut your losses is isolating the host. So making sure that it's not connected to the internet, it's not connected to anyone who absolutely doesn't need to use it, just pushing it into the darkest corner that you can and keeping it safe from interference. That's the best way to isolate it from attack. Unfortunately, it's not a guarantee. The only guarantee is to remediate the issue. But in some cases, there's not much of a choice besides isolation. So dealing with critical vulnerabilities, here's what you're mainly going to be facing, and these are what you are going to want to address as soon as possible. So when you get your pen test results back, if you see any of these issues on that report, these are what you should be aiming for. And these are also the most common, so good stuff. So here's your problems. You've got unsupported software, code, and operating systems. These are things that the people who made them have abandoned them. They are orphans in the void, and they're not getting patches, they're not getting updates, they're not getting fixes, but hackers are still playing with them. So you'll hear reports of somebody finding a vulnerability in a piece of software that's 15, 20 years old, but hey, they liked playing with it, so they found it. And at that point, you're toast because you're not getting any updates or patches to avoid those issues. That being said, software and operating systems alike suffer from this. And in a lot of cases, the option is to patch. In the case of operating systems, you may have to replace hardware and unsupported software, like our dear Photoshop 2001. You may just have to upgrade to a supported version, making sure that you can get those critical updates and you don't have those exposures. Misconfigurations are another popular one, a great vector for attack, and it's all about just incorrect settings. Really common in things like firewalls, where you have rule sets and things that may come default that just don't hold up to par. And when you're dealing with this, normally reconfiguration is the quickest option. Sometimes reconfiguration isn't an option and you have to go to that patching or upgrade. But most of the time, insecure configurations are things that you could fix. It also may be involved in the process of development, things like code issues. If you have a developer that produced your website for you and your website has SQL injection, you have to contact the developer to fix the code. But things like that, luckily, it's something that you can fix. And that's the best part about the unsupported software as well. There are options. And then my favorite one, and you've probably heard this a lot before, and you'll hear it 5 more times before the presentation is done, but the biggest vector is people. And it's not people being dumb or people doing bad things, it's people who just don't know. Educating your user base is going to be the best step to prevent exploitation. Making sure that people are aware of possible phishing risks, possible malware risks, encouraging users to apply updates and to not run ancient software or ancient hardware. Making sure that people are in the know and upgrading with you is the best way to ensure your business's security. Also secure passwords, that's a big one. All right, so now that you've gone through your results, you kind of know what you have to face and you know what you're dealing with, you're going to start preparing for a retest. And this is the entire remediation process, is the preparation for the retest. What a retest is it's either a second penetration test or usually it tends to be a vulnerability assessment, which is a less manual version of the penetration test. It analyzes the data of the network without the attacking portions. And that would occur shortly after the initial penetration test to give you a perspective on how your remediation went. It's like visiting the doctor or the dentist after a major procedure. It's making sure that everything looks tight, making sure that nothing new or weird popped up from remediation, and kind of tracking progress as you go. And it also gives you a chance to ask the question, what else can you do? What can you improve even more after the retest? So getting ready for that is remediation, fixing issues, fighting back against those vulnerabilities. Critical and high issue priority, making sure that you are closing all the open doors on your network, patching outdated software, replacing any outdated hardware, you know, the spiel. And I could continue to give the spiel for the rest of the presentation, but another critical point is addressing what you can in a reasonable time period and not waiting too long to retest. Not every issue is going to be fixed overnight. Not every issue is going to be fixed in a month, but ensuring that you are keeping a steady pace of remediation and addressing vulnerabilities and retesting within a short window of that initial testing can help ensure better security hygiene. It keeps you motivated. It keeps you in action. And then that is a big part of making it last. So good job, everybody. You made it. Your penetration testing days are over. Your network is pristine. The enemy is left speechless, helpless to attack you. And as delightful as it is, we can only pretend that's the truth. Security is a long road. It's good to celebrate accomplishments. It's important to address that you have done something great. Every step forward is a step forward, but the most important thing is to not stop walking. So keeping up with your network over time is critical. So the ways to do this are frequent and thoughtful patching. So this is keeping up with everything, and it can get a little overwhelming. The best way to do this is to have a patching schedule, either patching once every 2 weeks, once a month, just something consistent so that you can cycle through patches quickly and efficiently without having to go software by software, machine by machine, and making sure that it's addressing the latest issues. If there has recently been a huge malware attack and there's a patch out for that, get that patch, and making sure that those patches aren't going to interfere with your production environment. And then keeping updated on current security events. So I've been kind of alluding to this, but mainly keep in the know. What's going on out there? Know what's happening before it happens to you. All these issues that we're facing in the wild as penetration testers are things that we kind of saw coming over time, but they still managed to surprise us all. So stay alert, keep watching, and protect your business and information. And that's the best step that you can take, is being aware. And I've included some resources on the slide deck. I'm not going to talk too long about these. They'll be included in the deck that gets sent out, so you can access them there. These are some non-technical resources that can give a little bit of background on what I talked about today, and can also help you stay in the know about business security. That being said, I also have a lot of more technical resources that I didn't want to overload the slide deck with. So if that's something you're interested in, Jeremy can get you in connection with me, and I can provide some additional resources. But these can help you figure out some vulnerability metrics, learn about the penetration standards that we're currently experiencing, and keep in the know about goings-ons. And that's a wrap. So if anyone has any questions or anything they want to discuss, I am free to talk.
All right. Well, thank you, Taylor. Appreciate the insights. There are a few questions queued up. I'll just start at the top. First one is, how do I determine what frequency I should pen test my network?
An excellent question. And it's kind of one that doesn't have a perfect answer. Generally speaking, and this may be a little bit of a personal opinion as well, a once-a-year penetration test with a retest is wise. It's like seeing the doctor once a year, but it's not necessarily always enough. So making sure that you are testing frequently throughout the year, depending on your industry, can also be really beneficial. Quarterly assessments are also a good option if you don't want to go for a full penetration test every couple of months. But that once-a-year penetration test and then vulnerability assessments throughout the year is a really good option.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right, next one is, right now, all we educate our users on is phishing. If you had to choose, what's the next best thing to focus on?
Oof, another tough one. So it's great to hear that you've got phishing education, because that's a huge one. That's going to be your primary vector for malware attacks. That being said, if I had to pick a most important one after that, something that is simple for users to do is complex passwords. If your users are using winter 2017 as their password as we speak, they need to change it yesterday. Complex passwords are going to ensure the security of their accounts, and that means the security of your business. I would quantify it alongside encouraging users to maintain patches and updates on their hosts. These are all things that users can do easily and keep up with easily.
All right, I have a few passwords I need to change, but that's a different issue at this point.
I won't hold it against you personally.
I appreciate that. All right, we have one more question at the moment. Any suggestions on getting management to buy in on my network security initiatives?
Oh, isn't that a fun one? So I hate to put it in this perspective, but when you're dealing with, I don't want to say stubborn management, because budget has to be distributed, but network security is critical. If you don't have security, you don't have your business. So taking initial steps with a little bit of fear mongering is not necessarily a bad route to take. Encouragement through current events is an even better way to do it. So informing management on what could happen if something gets exploited and how easily that can occur, how often it occurs in the modern day. You know, this is a huge financial and well-being concern for a lot of businesses, and management just doesn't fully understand that quite yet. So using real life examples, keeping up with current events and providing those events to management can really help encourage them to be more security driven.
Okay. All right, those are all the ones that we had queued up. We're actually running very close to the end of the scheduled time. Taylor, definitely appreciate the time and effort and giving us all a little bit of a lesson here. If anyone has any further questions that they think of past this presentation, you'll all have my contact information. You can reach out to me directly, and we'll take it from there. Again, Taylor, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.